Hey, everybody, this is Monica Perez here with my favorite dive master, Jeremy Kuzmarov of Covert Action Magazine, who just re released an article about the really shocking details and implications of recent evidence about or details that have come to light about Marilyn Monroe's death. It is the August 4th, was 2022, was the 60th anniversary of her death. And the details are fascinating. So, Jeremy, I hope you don't mind I'm going to pick your brain. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So, I read that article, and yes, it feels like that's an old story. But what originally got me so fascinated by it is that you had also written an article about RFK and the cover up around his assassination. And what I hadn't realized, maybe I just wasn't a student of it, is that how intimately connected RFK was potentially to Marilyn's, what I think you are confident was murder. So let's start with that. Like, was Marilyn Monroe murdered? Are you confident with that?
Yeah, I'm very confident that Marilyn Monroe was murdered. The official story, yeah, just doesn't add up. It was clear, the official story had her dead at like 4 in the morning, but the time of death, yeah, really was hours earlier. And just the crime scene, there were so many oddities in the crime scene that makes it impossible. And, even the coroner said, that she had died. I mean, it was a clear murder. Yeah. So I mean, if you look into the evidence.
Right. So the official story is that she ate a bunch of barbiturates and intentionally committed suicide. But some of the details that you pointed out, that there was no water at her bedside originally, and then later it appeared in some photos. How do you know there was no water? Because it's just too many pills to just dry swallow like that. How do you know there was no water at her bedside? Where'd that come from?
Well, I think there was the first LAPD officer on the scene. His name was Jack, and I have to look up his last name. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he noticed right away certain things. And the psychiatrist. Well, firstly, the people were acting very oddly. Like her housekeeper was doing laundry at 4 in the morning while this was happening.
Why do you
You
think?
I mean, what?
Covering stuff up, maybe?
Yeah, and I mean, there was a huge gap between the time the police called and when the body was initially found. Uh, and there was, broken glass, and there was a question why all these people were there. Uh, and
Right.
yeah, the thing like the water, was claimed to be a drug overdose, but there's no water, and then it was put in after to make it look like it. So, uh,
It looks like it was Sergeant Jack Clemens.
Clemens,
Was
yeah.
was he okay, and so he told what he actually saw, so he was not in on it, he was telling the truth, right?
Yeah, he was there. He was the first one on the scene, and he reported things that were at odds, and also the strained behavior from the housekeeper to the psychiatrist. And it appeared they were all involved in a cover up.
So, the way I understand it, so the official story is supposedly that she died at 4 a.m., right? But, from the things I read in your article, her body was too cold for that to be true. There, there was even one story that she had actually been taken in an ambulance to a hospital, but died on the way and was brought back home. Was that something
Exactly.
that you think is
Yeah,
plausible?
yeah. It was reported that the medical personnel reported that she had been taken by ambulance, and then they brought her back. Yeah, and she died probably in the ambulance or beforehand. So.
And then the other detail that I thought was weird, that she was naked and prone, like fully outstretched on her bed, on her face, and that just seems like that's what the detective said, that it would be too weird. Like when you take that many, so much drugs that they kill you, you kind of don't die in that like swan like position.
Yeah, exactly. Everything like that, and I think she didn't sleep naked, so people who knew her said she
Oh,
doesn't sleep naked. So why was she found naked?
right.
Uh, and so everything just pointed to a clear case of cover up. That the official story was not true. Yeah.
Okay. So there are a couple of competing ideas of why she was killed. I guess I would say it seems like there are two ideas, but I would even like maybe put in a third one. One is that RFK himself did it. Another is that the mob did it. And is there an idea that maybe the CIA did it? Or is it really just the idea that RFK did it or the mob did it?
Well, the mob is connected with the CIA.
Right,
You know,
right.
like a figure like Sam Giancana, who was involved, he was not a CIA agent, but he did work for the CIA. So when you talk about the mob, sometimes there's a thin line between the mob and the CIA.
Yes, especially around those people, because there's one picture in your article of Marilyn Monroe with RFK and JFK, and it was just so freaky because I looked at that and it's like within, by the end of the decade, all of those people had been murdered, assassinated, and probably by the same people, one way or
Yeah,
another, unless
yeah,
RFK, and RFK didn't even realize what he was, that he was playing into the same hands as the people who would a year later kill his brother and 6 years later kill him.
yeah. I mean, it goes to show. I mean, American politics is a deadly sport, and I mean,
Right.
all the glamour didn't save the Kennedys. From the same fate as Maryland. And yeah, if you cross the deep state, and then you're gone. I mean,
Yes, and that's what the problem was, right? That she, I guess, pillow talk with JFK let her in on some secrets and stuff that she shouldn't have known, and she kept a diary, which from what you wrote, that she wrote some stuff that JFK shouldn't have told her about Vietnam. It was going to be a long war. This is 1962. She, I think, wrote and expressed numerous times that she felt that they were treating her like a piece of meat, a whore, a piece of ass, like that she did not like how they were treating her. And she maybe was considering exposing their behavior, which would have been just catastrophic for the family as far as political power in those days, I would think. Now you could probably get away with it, maybe, but in those days, no way. So I think that was the motive, right? That she knew stuff that she shouldn't have known, and really just that she could expose their behavior, and she kept a diary.
correct. Yeah. Well, I think she may have been used by the I mean, she wasn't entirely innocent herself. She was, very, she was a beautiful woman. She was a talented actress. But she kind of to get ahead. I don't think she was alone. She had to sleep with the right people, and then they used her. Even the CIA used her to seduce foreign leaders like Ahmed Sukarno in Indonesia. So she knew a lot about the CIA's operations. And then, yeah, in drawing close with the Kennedys, the Kennedys were very clearly, and there's strong evidence that Robert Kennedy was there, and he was concerned about the diary because
The
of what it was
She died.
revealed. Yeah, he was there the day she died. Whether he killed her or not is not certain, but I mean, it looks bad for him because he's there. And I mean, he's lying about where he is that day. And the diary was key, yeah, because in that diary, firstly, yeah, it had the revelation about the affair. And the Kennedys were trying to preserve this wholesome image. And, they were womenizers who use women like rag dolls, and they kind of led secret lives. And yeah, in that era, I mean, it's bad enough now. I mean, Bill Clinton lived that kind of lifestyle, and I mean, that was something shameful for him. He had to try and cover up and try and demonize all his accusers. So I mean, in that era, it was even more. That was the era of Leave It to Beaver, and
Yes, right.
so I mean, the
Yeah, she
Kennedy,
was really a '50s star. She died in '62. Like, you think of it as the
yeah,
'60s Andy Warhol and stuff, but she was a '50s star.
yeah. This
And
is the
think about what she
1950s.
did. She
Yeah,
was the first one to be naked in Playboy, was she not? Wasn't she in the first issue
yeah.
of Playboy? I mean, that she was really selling out in that way. That, and she was so beautiful. I know she got a little nip and tuck here and there, but she was unbelievably beautiful. I would think, like, why would she have to go that route? But I guess that was the way it worked, that you couldn't get anywhere if you maybe didn't cooperate. And these guys did pass her around, supposedly, to the foreign leaders. I want to just ask you a little bit about two things. One, that the what makes you think that RFK was there?
Well, yeah, and first, like with the diary, there were also revelations about, as you say, like Vietnam. She was, I guess this loose pillow talk. She had written stuff like the Kennedy said about how the Diem, they were kind of previewing the Diem assassination. They were discussing that the U.S. would be in Vietnam for a long time. Other assassination they may have talked about, like Rafael Trujillo in Dominican Republic, and stuff related to Cuba, because Robert Kennedy took a lead, and John apparently was sick a lot of the time, and Robert was actually running the policy toward Cuba. It was a pretty aggressive policy, although some wanted them to go further and use the military. And the CIA got upset because ultimately, I mean, Castro prevailed, stayed in power, and they couldn't get to him, so they blamed the Kennedys. But they were going pretty hardcore after him. So there was a lot of that in the diary, and that would, and maybe stuff also in the nuclear policy. And stuff that they, nobody, a regular civilian, person not in the government should know. So that diary, yeah, was very problematic for the Kennedys, and that's why Robert Kennedy was there that day, because yeah, he ended it. So to relate to your recent question, Kennedy wanted to get the diary, and supposedly he was at a friend's ranch that weekend. That was the official story. But then the friend admitted that he didn't see him, and he wasn't with him at that time. And there's evidence indicate he was there from firstly hotel records, that he was in the Beverly Hills Hotel, that he'd been with Peter Lawford. There's the neighbors who saw him going walking towards the house. There's the admission of the housekeeper. Then there's a confession of Peter Lawford, because Peter Lawford was his brother-in-law, and they were sidekick. They hung around with the Rat Pack, and they lived the high life, chasing women and gambling. And he gave a confession. He was very he felt guilty about this, and he gave a confession before he died to Mike Rothmiller, who was a former LAPD investigator who wrote this book, Bombshell. So there's a lot of evidence that would put him at the scene. Then there's these tapes, because Kennedy's
Oh,
had a
yeah.
lot of enemies.
What tapes?
Well, there's this guy Fred Otash. He worked with Jimmy Hoffa and with the CIA and the mafia, and they were spying on Kennedy's every move. Marilyn Monroe was under surveillance. The Kennedys were under surveillance. So
Wow.
these surveillance tapes captured Kennedy and Lawford in the house, and Kennedy was kind of roughing her up to get to the diary. So now the question is, if Kennedy left her in a bad state but didn't kill her, and then mafia killers came in, gave the coup de grace, and were going to set up Kennedy, since they had the evidence of him being there. They were going to leak those tapes to ruin him. Is one plausible scenario that Sam Giancana lays out in his memoir, or Kennedy himself killed her, whether intentionally or because the tapes did expose him treating her roughly and slipping something in her water. Whether it was a tranquilizer or whether it was something more deadly is open question. Now, Peter Lawford, before his death, said that Kennedy killed her. He thought Kennedy killed her uh, because she was, passed out on the couch. Now, it could have been from a tranquilizer. Maybe he thought she was dead, but it was just a tranquilizer to subdue her, because she was trying to prevent him from getting the diary, and she was a strong woman who he was kind of abusing her, and she was fighting back. So he may have slipped a tranquilizer, or it was a deadly pill.
Or
And
maybe it would have been something for, like, a truth serum type thing because he was looking for that diary, right?
yeah, his main
I mean, I'm
because
not saying it's truth serum, but maybe she just wasn't cooperating and he needed that cooperation, but so did he find the
yeah,
diary?
the diary got destroyed. I believe it did. The diary was only released at the church hearing. Somehow, I guess it wasn't destroyed, but it was not revealed to the public until the church committee hearings in 1975. At that point, the church was able to get the diary and expose it publicly. So, yeah,
Oh, really?
eventually, but I mean,
Wow.
Robert was dead, John was dead, Teddy's career was ruined. So at that point, it wasn't as damning toward the Kennedys,
Could you get a
politically.
PDF of that? Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it. There
But you
are.
think it's out there in its entirety, or do you think it's under lock and seal and you just get what they read into the church commission?
That's a good question. Yeah, I've only seen what was written into the church commission,
Right.
so and it's I don't
I
know.
guess
You have to ask Mike Roth because Mike Rothmiller, he published this book Bombshell. I mean, I was basically reviewing his book
yeah.
and a
Mhm.
couple other books in my article, so he knows more than me. You could get in touch with him and
Yeah.
ask. He
Well,
may
I'd
have
have to
seen
read
it.
the book first, and
Yeah,
I was
he's
counting on
researched
you.
this for years, and he knows all the detail. I mean, he would argue
Wow.
strongly Kennedy was the killer. There is
Right.
a documentary that was produced on Netflix by Anthony Summers. He's kind of cautious. I mean, the documentary makes clear she was murdered and there was a cover up, and he's kind of cautious to name Kennedy as the killer. Again, Kennedy looks bad in this. Whether he's but Rothmiller draws on the confession by Peter Lawford, and he draws on these surveillance tapes, and he's quite confident that Kennedy was the killer. And Kennedy did have Kennedy bragged to Marilyn about that he had connection with the underworld and with the CIA, and that he could order people's death. He was like bragging to her that he had the power to have people killed. And maybe that was one of the things he didn't want being revealed because she was a woman scorned. Like Marilyn was very upset the way she was treated, and she said she was going to have a press conference the week before she was. She was killed on a Saturday night. She was planning a press conference like Monday
Wow,
to
really?
expose Kennedy, the real Kennedy, and how she was treated and some of the secrets that he had told her. So this was going to ruin possibly, both Kennedys. I
But
mean,
it would have saved their lives.
so there's a clear motive for Kennedy being the killer, unless he was set up because the mob did have a vendetta against the Kennedys because the Kennedys had double crossed the mafia. The mafia had helped the Kennedys get in power through the Kennedy family was connected through the mob through Joe Kennedy, who had been a bootlegger during Prohibition. And according to legend, they had helped the Kennedy John get elected in the state of Illinois. But then, Robert Kennedy's attorney general had started prosecuting some of the mafia and went after Jimmy Hoffa. So they had a vendetta against him and they wanted to ruin him. So there is a motive for setting him up, but there's also a motive for Kennedy silencing Marilyn and trying to preserve their reputation and saving their political careers. And I mean, there is a mythology about the Kennedys. I think you see it like, I mean, I like Oliver Stone. I really have respect for his work, and I agree with his assessment on the Kennedy assassination that it was, Oswald was not the lone assassin. There was a conspiracy. But I see it, I think Peter Dale Scott, if you've read, I would recommend to viewers to read Peter Dale Scott's book, Deep Politics and the Death of JFK. And he presents it as kind of an inter-elite power rivalry. And he goes into the forces that were behind the Kennedy assassination, the deep state forces, and he shatters the myth of Oswald as a lone assassin. But saying all that, I don't think Kennedys were choir boys, or some like Stone. I think because he I think correctly identifies that Kennedy was victim of a conspiracy involving elements of the CIA and the deep state. He wants to kind of depict, and he's a Hollywood director, so there always has to be a good guy and a bad guy. But I think in real life, that there's a lot of shades of gray, and it's not always just good versus evil. Like I don't think the Kennedys and this episode with Marilyn Monroe is a window into the dark side of the Kennedys. And I mean, Seymour Hersh wrote a good book called The Dark Side of Camelot. And the family was very violent, and they did, I mean, if you look at John's presidency, I mean, they were carrying out some criminal activities like in Latin America. I mean, in Cuba, they were pretty hard line in trying to facilitate the overthrow of Fidel Castro and carrying out terrorist activities within Cuba. And they orchestrated the assassination of Rafael Trujillo. And like Vietnam, they had escalated the U.S. involvement in Vietnam with the special forces, and they were sending in bombing. And Agent Orange started a spraying of Agent Orange under the Kennedy's orders, and on down the line. In Laos, they were interfering and they set the groundwork for a later escalation of U.S. Uh, involvement in countries like Laos or other countries in Latin America. They were involved in the facilitation of numerous coups in Latin America. So, and then Robert apparently was a very violent person. I mean, he has this wholesome kind of Boy Scout image, and the New Left movement attached themselves to him. He was going to be their savior and hero, and he did. I mean, he was very smart politically in kind of aligning himself. He saw that the social movement of the '60s had developed into a powerful political force, so he changed his tune because. Robert came up allied with Joseph McCarthy. He'd actually worked with Joseph McCarthy, and he was a rabid anti-communist. And I mean, in his personal life, I think they were very entitled, and with that entitlement, they always need to get their way. And if they don't get their way, they will treat people very, very harshly. And there are episodes in his past, even when he was a student at Harvard, where he would beat, if he wasn't getting all the attention or he had a rival, he would treat him very badly or even beat him up. So, I think, and that's Robert. I mean, I think they're the dark side of the family, and I think there's more a power struggle within American politics rather than a good faction, a bad faction. I mean, they're one faction, powerful faction that was ultimately destroyed by their enemies, who were arguably worse politically. I mean, you had the big oil who were allied against them, and I mean, we can go on about this, but again, my point is that if you look into the way the Kennedys treated with Marilyn Monroe, they treated her very badly as a person, and then you can look also at their policies in that era were not very progressive in any way. So
Well, a few things that I think I've read that kind of relate to this or would support this kind of a pattern. I don't know if you've ever heard of or read Mary's Mosaic. It was a book. Did you ever hear of it? It was a book about Cord Meyer's wife, who was JFK's last mistress. And Cord Meyer was the CIA guy who was ahead of, he was in charge of Operation Mockingbird. He had also led a one world movement where he wanted to be the president of the world, this guy, Cord Meyer. And his wife was, I don't know if they were divorced or what, but she was sleeping with Kennedy. And then the day the Warren Commission report came out, she was murdered kind of like suspiciously on a walking path, and she just got murdered out of nowhere pretty quickly. So it wasn't like it's at night and she was stupid and it was some homeless guy. It was like, and it looked like an assassination. And at the same time, I think somebody was, maybe James Jesus Angleton might have been the man on the spot, but I think he was involved in going into her house to try to get her diary. And she apparently was, I guess, who was it who said Ken Kesey? He was, I forget which one was the sex guy, which one was the drug guy. But they were Timothy Leary. She was doing acid with JFK because she was friends with Timothy Leary, and she was opening his mind to supposedly, according to this book, the possibility of peace and giving him, visions of a different way. So I thought that was interesting because maybe they just, were in the habit of cleaning up these girls who knew too much.
well, there are a lot of murders, surrounding the Kennedy assassination, possibly also the Marilyn Monroe case, to cover up the truth. A lot of people got killed.
Well,
So
there was one woman in your article. You didn't mention it, but there's a picture of Marilyn Monroe and Dorothy Kilgallen. Did you know that she was also murdered, or supposedly she OD'd on barbiturates in 1965, and she had been digging into the Kennedy assassination. She was on Truth or Consequences. She had one of the first stars, one of the first 500 stars on Hollywood Boulevard, Dorothy Kilgallen. She was huge, and people don't even know her name. She was in your thing, but I think she was murdered too. The book came out in 2017, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much.
yeah.
And the subtitle is The Mysterious Death of What's My Line. That was it. What's My Line TV star and media icon Dorothy Kilgallen. She was into true crime, and then she died this strange death. I don't know if you knew that, but she was
Yeah, I
in.
think it was mentioned in my
Oh,
article.
was it? Okay,
I
I didn't
read
see
a bit
that.
about that, yeah, and I think she knew too much about the Marilyn Monroe case and the Kennedy, and there was connection between them. Uh,
Right. Yeah, I that's probably why you would have the picture of her. All I noticed was the picture of her with Marilyn Monroe. Gosh, golly. So So there was her too. She died in 1965, and it's funny. It's ironic that if Marilyn Monroe had that press conference and ruined those guys' career, they would be alive. They would have lived.
That's true, yeah, that's
You
the irony,
know,
yeah.
is that
It would have
ironic?
been better for them, yeah.
And instead, they had to die with blood on their hands, which is too bad because you think of them as a victim and a hero, but it's not gonna. It doesn't negate what you've done in your past. Being a victim doesn't negate sins and crimes. So, so that makes me ask. So that you wrote the other article, which was new evidence implicates CIA, LAPD, FBI, and the mafia as plotters in an elaborate hit plan to prevent RFK from ever reaching the White House. This was an article from June on Covert Action Magazine. And it goes into a tremendous amount of detail. I mean, it's like impossible to believe that RFK was murdered by Sirhan Sirhan. I mean, it's impossible to believe that, right? I mean,
Yeah, I think it's physically impossible, just like the Monroe case. I mean, just the basic facts, and even the time of death in that case, and some of the points we were saying, from the lack of water to coroner's report. I think in the Monroe case, the coroner report didn't report any ingestion of any drugs. So the official story just it's simply wrong. And I mean, in the Robert Kennedy case, you had Sirhan Sirhan fired 4 shots, but he was the two of the shots I think were up in the air because he was tackled by Robert Kennedy's bodyguard, was a football player, Rosie Greer. So he could have only fired 2 shots, and yet the crime scene had about 10, at least 10, possibly as many as 18 or 19 bullets that were fired. And then Kennedy was shot behind the ear. Sirhan was in front of him. The fatal bullet came from behind the ear. So I mean, just those facts alone make clear that there are more than one shooter. So this idea of Sirhan, the lone assassin, and again, since he was killed from behind, somebody had to come from behind. So Sirhan was very likely the decoy. Now, their allegation that he had been brainwashed, he had been targeting the Operation MK Ultra, because Sirhan remembered nothing, and even the police who interrogated him were surprised by his behavior, because he was behaving as if just like normal, making normal conversation. He wasn't nervous. He didn't even appear to know what had happened, and had no memory of it. And there are indications, yeah, that he may have been hypnotized. Um, and then their stuff possibly was planted in his home to make it look like he had, given these writings. Because in his case, writings that indicate a political vendetta against Kennedy. But I mean, officially, the motive was for his case that Kennedy was supporting Israel in the Six Day War because he was Palestinian. But at that time, that issue was kind of the majority of people supported the Israelis, and every single Democratic Party candidate was supporting the Israelis. So, what was the point of taking out Kennedy?
I
If
had that
that's
thought
the
too.
issue, yeah. So
Yeah,
there's no
yeah.
motive. I mean, for Sirhan. So it's. I mean, I don't know if he's innocent. He may have been either part of the plot and promised money, or he was, as they say, brainwashed and used as a patsy without really his knowledge, and he was a victim. That's what I think a lot of his supporters are claiming, including I think Robert Kennedy Jr. has supported his clemency, or at least release from prison. And I think he was voted by a parole board, but that he should be released after all those years. But then the governor, I think, squelched it. So
Yeah, I think so, Newsom.
yeah,
So so I think actually there was audio of the shots too. I think somebody had it recorded on
hmm
audio that there were too many shots for it to be Sirhan Sirhan, and you could tell that it came from 2 different directions.
yeah, that was another bit of evidence. Yeah, there's
S
yeah.
So, from your article, and it's so comprehensive, I really encourage people to do that one. That's covertactionmagazine.com. It's from June of this year. So, a couple of details here. His lawyer was Grant Cooper, who was Johnny Roselli's personal lawyer, who was a mobster who supposedly ran an assassination program for the CIA against Castro. So And this guy, Cooper, encouraged Sirhan to plead guilty, which, of course, I hate plea bargains because I want to know the truth. And I think we should go through the process of getting information out there, even if the person isn't really resisting. But I do like that process. And this doesn't allow for any truth. So it's like, I thought it was kind of suspicious that he seems to have these, big high priced lawyers. And who is this guy? And then to have a mob related one is kind of curious.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think they didn't want the truth getting out, and that's what I've been doing is I developed a series at Covert Action Magazine, and I'm hoping to develop it into a book. That because there are a lot of books that focus on one individual assassination. A lot of these authors, I give great credit to it, whether Mike Rothmiller or for Robert Kennedy, there's a couple authors who studied this exhaustively, and I kind of summarized their finding in my article. One was Lisa Pease, and there are a couple other authors, but there's no author who's put these all together and pointed to a systematic pattern and asked, what does this say about the American political system and American exceptionalism? I mean, we think we're better than other countries. We're this beacon of democracy, and Putin's a killer, or. But I mean, look at our politics. Our politics are extremely violent. There are these. What I'm finding is, it's a factional power struggle, not between good and evil, but between power families like the Kennedys and other cliques that the Bushes, or other cliques like Texas Oil and military interests that champion Lyndon Johnson over Kennedy because Johnson was more militaristic than the Kennedys. And they're deep state forces that in each case that I mean, going down to the corruption of the legal system that prevents a full accounting of the facts. And there are lawyers who are corrupted or either through alliance with the mafia. And you see the same thing in the Martin Luther King assassination. James Earl Ray did not get a fair trial, and he was given these lawyers who basically blackmailed him, and they said they were going to produce a book, and they said they would save his life, that he wouldn't get the death penalty, but they sold him out to dry. And James Earl Ray was very clearly a patsy. That operation had been planned at the highest level of the FBI for a number of years. And Ray was, they had him escape from prison because they bought off the wardens, and they were able to control him because he was an escaped convict, and they told him exactly what to do and where to be, and they set him up. And it was impossible for him to have been the shooter of King based on the angle of they claimed he had shot King, who was on the balcony in Memphis, from this rooming house, but he would have to have been hanging out the window at a position that even the top sniper in the world could never carry it out. And Ray knew nothing about guns and had been in the Army, and he was a very poor shooter, just like Oswald. So anyway, there's a pattern you see in studying these, not just the assassination of the 60s, but going into later, even more recent years, or other killings like Paul Wellstone and Vince Foster. And all these seem to be connected. There's a common thread of corruption of the legal system that prevents a full accounting of the facts, and recognition that these are political, in most cases, political assassinations. And Monroe's case, is a unique case, but there are political motives behind it, and that was covered up in the same way a lot of these other high profile killings were covered up, and the justice system was not functioning effectively. So,
well, I want to ask you who Paul Wellstone is, but before we get to that, I'm assuming I'm sure you know this, that on the way out the door, the Miguel Rodriguez wrote a memo. He was on the U.S. Attorney's staff. He was on top of the Vince Foster investigation. He said a finding of suicide is not supported by the facts, and I cannot continue. And I believe in the memo, he specifically named several people who were sliding behind him, including Brett Kavanaugh. And he said, I'm telling you, this is not a suicide. And then, of course, Kavanaugh just totally covered that up. And now he's a Supreme Court justice. So I always thought that the whole thing about Brett Kavanaugh getting, I thought it was kind of like the Monica Lewinsky thing. Like, they take a sexual scandal to drown out the real political thing or murder or whatever. Like Monica Lewinsky crowded out Whitewater from the public eye. And the same thing, So, uh, so Brett Kavanaugh, it seems to me, he got rewarded for that, and Miguel Rodriguez basically went into hiding, became whatever. I hate to out how Miguel Rodriguez is in hiding, but not that everyone wouldn't know it anyway, who wanted to find it. But so that was a legal system where there was somebody in there who wanted it to function correctly, and it was not possible to do so. And so, like the Vince Foster thing, it's definitely an evidence that the investigators said it was not a suicide. But who is Paul Wellstone?
Yeah, and to add to that, yeah, I think you see that pattern. Like I also looked into the Oklahoma City bombing and Merrick Garland. That trial was not done properly. It was covered up. Timothy McVeigh was not the lone bomber. It's also impossible, and he was in the company of all these different individuals who were FBI informants. But Merrick Garland ensured, current Attorney General, that McVeigh was fingered as lone assassin, and that this was never to be brought up, who he was kept company with, and there's obviously something deeper there. So that's the pattern you see. Yeah, it's not
I
just one
gotta
case,
I
but
got to tell you about OKC, a couple of things in OKC. One is Timothy McVeigh. If you have dug into that already, I'm sure you saw that he wrote a letter to his sister, which was published by the New York Times, saying that he was in special ops and he was pulled out to do some domestic stuff. And then, at that time, he supposedly started going to militia meetings and all that. Merrick Garland, not only is the AG, but he was a failed attempt at being a Supreme Court justice. I mean, that looks like a way that they can pay some of these guys back. So I wrote an article about that when Merrick Garland was up. I was like, this guy's totally compromised. He obviously plays ball. You do not want him in this position. It's a reward, but it's also a safe choice for them. And then there was another guy you should, if you haven't heard of this, ever hear of a guy named Donald Sachtleben?
no.
Donald Sachtleben. Okay, Donald Sachtleben was the guy. You may remember during the Obama administration, I think there was like a scandal where a Fox News reporter, I think his emails were cracked into, and there was a bunch of breaches like that. At the same time that the second potential underwear bomber, there was a leak that exposed this underwear bomber, the second attempt to take down a plane like the first one did. But what was exposed was that underwear bomber was an MI6 agent. An MI6 operative was commissioning a bomb from this Yemeni guy to put on a plane. And the whistle was blown supposedly by this guy, Donald Sachtleben. Now, Sachtleben was the bomb expert at OKC. He was the FBI investigator at OKC. And when they went to arrest him for being a whistleblower on the bomb, which he might have been able to make an argument that he did the right thing in saving lives, they, by what the Washington Post called a bizarre coincidence, he was arrested for kiddie porn. The FBI found tons of kiddie porn on his laptop. And it was funny because he did a lot of FBI work on that same computer. And it just seems like for him to have just troves and troves and troves of kiddie porn that they happened to be discovering in a parallel investigation. They had no idea that that was the day they were going to get him on this whistleblowing. Donald Sachtleben, he definitely went to jail for it. But my theory of that was always that he realized that when he investigated OKC, that people really were getting killed by these operations, that it wasn't just false flags without, like another one was the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, which killed 6 people. There's a recording by Ahmad Salem talking to his FBI handler saying, you have me in this cell and I'm trying to stop these guys from getting real explosives. And then you come in and give them real explosives. Like, what's your problem? And the FBI is like, I don't know. I mean, bureaucracy. What are you going to do? And people really died. And I think that Sachtleben or whoever, some people realize that real people are going to die in these things and occasionally do blow the whistle. So if you do OKC, you got to find Sachtleben, I think.
Okay, I'm going to look into that. Yeah. But yeah, again, it's this pattern. And yeah, we see that the American criminal justice system is often corrupted. And, we think of other countries like Russia as this like dark, corrupt country. But I mean, we have to look at our own House and see how our government has become extremely corrupt. And these people who get promoted, yeah, have often done the bidding of the very powerful who've committed serious criminal acts, and it's shameful. I mean,
Who is Paul Wellstone, though? I don't even know who that
well, he
is.
was somebody else. I mean, it looks like his plane was brought down. That was in the build up to the Iraq War. He was like a strong liberal who represented liberal value. He was a senator from the state of Minnesota, and he fought. He was like a real liberal who fought for liberal causes, and he was opposing the Iraq War. He had opposed the first. Well, he was on the radar of the Bushes. Like when he first got elected to the Senate, I think when he was being confirmed in the Senate or like introductory ceremony, he like said something on camera to Bush, like, this is a crime that you're going into war in Iraq, and he kind of embarrassed Bush, and the Bushes hated him ever since. And then he was like one of the Senate in the 2002 midterm elections. It was very close, and the Republicans had a narrow lead in the Senate. And he was like, he was poised to be reelected. And I think he was like the decisive, him and one other person, Max Cleland, who also lost that election. If those two had been elected, Democrats would have had control of the Senate. They could have tried to block the war in Iraq. But Wellstone he died in a plane crash like 2 weeks before the election or a month before the election. And then with him out of there, they had to scramble to find a replacement, and his replacement lost. The Republican who was very closely allied with the Bush family and Bush policy on Iraq. And they're all kind of oddity once you look into. There was a study by two scholars called American Assassination that found strong evidence that of foul play, and that the plane was shot down, possibly through some very sophisticated military equipment and technology that they may have used. It's another case where we think that would happen in another country, not supposedly beacon of democracy, but they're using dirty methods to ensure control of the Senate in that case and go forward with a criminal war in Iraq, just like they assassinated Kennedys or Martin Luther King or others.
So you actually, and I think sometimes they do sideways people. Like, for example, I remember Wyden and Udall were really vocal about, maybe it was internet privacy or it was something that I cared about. Like I was on their side. And I remember Udall's brother died hiking. And I thought, I bet we don't hear from him again on this issue. And we didn't. And I just always wonder about that. Same thing with Travis Kalanick. He was the head of Uber. And he was, a lovable jerk, Elon Musk style, jerk, 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 but that's okay. We don't care. And then all of a sudden it was like, he's got to go. He's got to go. He's got to go. He's got to go. And he's like, no, I'm just a lovable jerk. I'm not going anywhere. And he absolutely, no matter what they did, he refused to go, would not go. And just the pressure came down to like tell Uber drivers to boycott and to go to Lyft and all of this stuff. And then one day, his parents were in a horrible accident on a boat on a lake on which they lived, a placid lake on which they lived. They were in a horrible accident and the mother died, and nearly the father died too. And they wouldn't even have found him except for the dog swam to shore. And I said to myself, like, they're trying to take this guy out. He probably doesn't have a wife, because if he had a wife, it would have been her, and he did not. And lo and behold, he stepped down the next day. And I remember thinking, or shortly thereafter, and I remember thinking, what did he do? What did he do that like turned the worm? And I looked back and I found that just in that moment when it turned from like he's a cute jerk to he's got to go, he conducted, I think it was called Operation Gray Ball. And the government was trying to use the Uber location stuff to just track people. And he didn't like that. So he, instead of saying no, I think he said no and they said yes. He just he developed software that would just make it impossible for them to do it. And they blew a fuse but you didn't really hear about it too much. And then that's when like that narrative went away. So sometimes I think if they can't like hit them directly, they just take out somebody so close to them that they either get the message or they can't function. And I also think it's usually if they're in a position of power, if they know something firsthand that would be really credible and change things. Like I even think Joan Rivers was assassinated because she knew that Trump wasn't this hot-headed boob. She thought he was an intelligent guy who had some savvy, and she would say that, and you couldn't shut her up. Like I know this is probably too far down the rabbit hole for you, but I've stumbled across many examples of what I think people getting taken out. Ron Brown and James Forrestal, or
Yeah,
Forrestal.
that was part of the series. There's a lot of it. In the case of James Forrestal, yeah, again, the official narrative seems implausible. I think they claim he tried to, I don't know, like he jumped out of a window, but they claim he tried to hang himself first, and like he had rope around him and then jumped. And there was glass like near his bed, and there were signs of a struggle on his bed. So, and like
Yeah.
he was, his brother had seen him that day, and like he was extremely happy and excited to get out. He was being released from this mental hospital the next day, and he was planning to write it again with a diary. He was planning to publish his diary, and he had been in the government for a while. He knew secrets about Pearl Harbor and about the Cold War, and so I mean, yeah, you become suspicious because I mean, maybe not every case people were assassinated, but there are many cases where it's evident that they were murdered, and the murder was cover up. So I mean, it's like the boy who cried wolf. I mean, you stop believing after a while when there's so many cases that were murders. You don't know the extent of it, and you become suspicious. And I
Yeah.
mean, you can look in the Clintons. There's so many people who turned up, very conveniently, dead for the Clintons who were going to be testifying about Whitewater. There was a guy, Jerry Parks, who had all this information about Mena, Arkansas, and the Clintons' involvement. And he had kept a file back from the early 80s when Roger Clinton and Bill Clinton were out partying and, doing cocaine with underage girls. And he had all that information. And then he, was suddenly was in a mysterious car crash. And there's so many things like that. And there's the case with Obama. There's a whistleblower who came out and gave a press conference that he had gay sex with Obama, and it turned out that letters turned out that Obama actually basically indicated Obama was either gay or bisexual. Uh,
Larry Sinclair.
yeah, Larry Sinclair.
I don't think he's dead. I
No, he's
think,
alive. He's
yeah,
alive.
he's alive. Okay.
He had insider knowledge about
Yeah.
Obama, and then
Right.
some people around Obama turned up dead, like a campaign worker on his first campaign.
Oh.
I have to look up the name, but
Oh, wow.
I forget all the names off the top of my head. I think Donald something. He died, and Obama, his mother believes Obama was behind it, and it was because of the gay, the stuff that Obama was having gay sex, and that would discredit him before the election, and shatter his wholesome family image. But I mean, it sounds like it's out of the National Enquirer, but then again, this letter turned out like you think, oh, that's just like they're just playing. It's just like National Enquirer. But then a letter turns up that basically proves Obama is either gay or bisexual, and so it becomes very plausible. What this guy Sinclair is saying, and there's no explanation for some of these deaths otherwise. Uh, and then it goes on down the Seth Rich case. So there's so
The
many.
Seth Rich case, that seemed like sensationalism. That was the one I didn't even dig into because when I heard like Eric Erickson talking about it, or Rush Limbaugh, I was like, come on, they don't out these assassinations on Fox News. Come on.
But I mean, yeah, I mean, he was
Did you
not
look into
wrong
the Seth Rich thing?
a little bit. I mean, he was supposedly the guy who had the knowledge, that would disprove all those claims about Russia, and that he was the one. It wasn't the
Oh.
Russians who leaked those emails; it was him because he was a disgruntled Democratic Party operative. And then he died, walking home from a bar, but he wasn't robbed. So I mean, why would somebody just kill a guy in the middle of the street, not take his wallet? I mean, if it's not a robbery, and there's evidence again that he had insider knowledge, that he was the one who leaked the stuff about, to discredit Hillary Clinton to show how corrupt she was. It had nothing to do with the Russians. So, I mean, I don't know for sure about that case, but again, there are other cases where, I mean, the fact like Robert Kennedy, he was murdered, there was a cover up behind it. Martin Luther King, Marilyn Monroe. So, this guy, Jerry Parks, I mean, I don't know. It's not just coincidence that the guys who have all the dirt on the Clintons turn up dead, and
Yes,
I
and
mean,
a few things though. First of all, like with the who would kill this guy and not rob him, why do these school shootings happen, or why do we have to disarm Iran? It's all the argument often comes down to he's crazy. Guy's crazy. Somebody crazy did it. People are crazy. They do things for no reason. And my argument is even if you're crazy, you do have a reason. You could be wrong, but you have a reason. It could be a reason that makes no sense. And they even get to like crazy or stupid, even when you look at stuff that Trump does, or when he started bombing Syria and everything. And they're like, well, he's a hothead. He's emotional. He loves little babies. It's like just emotionalism, crazy. Like there are reasons that have a lot of power, and there's a deep state, and there are people who have power who control their puppets, and they're not allowing their puppets to just have moments of hot-headedness that determine the course of foreign policy. They're there, and especially when that foreign policy is just a continuation of the previous foreign policy, to say, he was just got worried about the babies and decided to kill a bunch of people when he was just dumping the same amount of bombs as Obama on Syria. Obviously, there's a reason behind these things, but they don't want you to know. And sometimes the only reason they can give you is like somebody's crazy. Somebody just killed him and didn't rob him because they're crazy. But there were
yeah,
a few. Yeah.
I
Go ahead.
think like if I could just add a point, it's that
Yeah,
like
sure.
the population has been depoliticized over generations, so they don't think in political terms. It's maybe only a small number who are thinking about the political implications, uh, and so I think people are conditioned just not to think about politics and to connect certain events to political happenings, and to just buy into this narratively crazy people. But again, there's a lot of evidence in a lot of these cases that they are, political events, and there are many political assassinations that take place, and it's rare. Like even this case in Japan, people I knew said, "Oh, it's just some crazy guy took out Shinzo Abe." But there's a political motive. I mean, Abe was a prominent political figure, and I think he was tied with the Japanese far right and wants to militarize Japan further. And this incident was to trigger political change, not in a good way. And you have that throughout history. I mean, go back to the First World War was triggered by a political assassination. So I think it's mixed in with this depoliticization, mixed in with this American exceptionalism. We think America is more
Yes.
pure than other
Yes.
countries, and when we don't have political assassinations, when we do, and a lot of these acts were assassinations, and they altered the politics. Like the 60s assassinations fundamentally transformed American politics and allowed the ascendancy of the new right movement. And other incidents had other political implications. So again, it's those phenomena of depoliticization and American exceptionalism that prevents people from understanding that a lot of the violence we see is political in nature.
And it's not always the other side. I have to say something about exceptionalism, but I also want to say something about Abe and Malcolm X. Um, because I think like the assassination of Malcolm X was much more important than any of the other ones, because he had turned the corner. He was could have led us to like a post racist paradigm. And having been there, obviously very authentic, they took him out, and it didn't just like give rise to the right, it also changes the left. So it it, it wouldn't surprise me. Like what I was thinking with Abe is that I think that he was killed by his own side in order to foster his goal of militarization, because then the elections won by a landslide. So you think, or even like Netanyahu, I think, didn't Netanyahu, was it, it's that Rabin who was assassinated I think on the precipice of Oslo Accords #2, and it was by a right wing guy, and
Yeah.
then Netanyahu got in, that
Yeah.
would probably be crossing the aisles. But the exceptionalism thing I think is important because what I try to tell people is listen to that word. It's not American extraordinariness. It's American exceptionalism, and it's often used to suggest that America is an exception to the rules, like the law of sovereignty, that we are an exception to that. We don't have to follow the rule of law because we have this like divine right thing. That exceptionalism thing is really insidious. It's deeper than people realize, and it's really a horrible, horrible expression. And it leads to a lot of things that go against morality. And when that happens, it destabilizes. So I actually, when I had a call-in show, I had somebody calling from Africa who said that he remembered JFK was really gave a lot of hope to people in Africa that there would be a kind of pox, a post-American pox, not like that was his last speech at American University. JFK said, I want a peace for all time, for all mankind, not a Pax Americana. That's not what I want. I want something more than that. And they had hope over there in the Middle East and North Africa and stuff. This guy was saying that when you give people that kind of hope, when you think that when they think there's an even playing field, when they think that they can work hard and be treated fairly, they're more likely to obey the rules. It's when you don't feel there are rules, it's that you don't feel bound by them. And then you have to kind of go rogue, I think. So I think American exceptionalism is highly destabilizing around the world. It's really awful. But and feel free to answer that. But I also want you to talk a little bit before we wrap about the idea of competing factions. If you really think that it hasn't been consolidation at the top more recently.
Well, I think so. Yeah, I think we even see that now, very clearly. I mean, even with the raid on Trump, I mean, there's clearly faction among the oligarchy, because I mean, the dominant party in the U.S. are tied to big money interests. They may have different bases and different industry backing them, and I think yeah, this goes back a long way. And as I say, with the Kennedys, I think there is this what's the word? False nostalgia, or they want a liberal hero, so they present Kennedy as the good, and they were murdered, by evil forces. But again, if you look into the Kennedys' history as a
Oh,
family, you see that it was a very ruthless family, how they accumulated their wealth, and that they governed not necessarily. Yeah, they may have given hope. I mean, John was a magnetic speaker, and but he may have given hope to people around the world. But I mean, his policies weren't necessarily any better than Eisenhower's. I mean, toward the third world, he was pretty aggressive in intervening in third world countries. He was supporting. In fact, I read a study. The military budget was higher under Kennedy than under Lyndon Johnson, and they were intervening very aggressively in Cuba. Robert Kennedy called for bringing the terrors of the earth to Cuba, and they sanctioned all these assassinations. And they had connection to the mafia, and they were using them to assassinate Castro. And even their domestic policy was not particularly progressive. So again, this I think mythology developed about the Kennedys, and really I think what we see in American politics is like in other countries. Is more of an oligarchy where you have power, different power faction and power struggles that are going on, and they will use violent, ruthless methods to obtain power. Now we have cliques like the Clinton, Obama, Bush. Trump's a player, and they each of them are immoral in their own way. And I mean, sure, you might, I think, sensibly, you might find you'll get slightly better policy with certain political factions, so you may ally with that. But again, I think and that gets to the point about American exceptionalism, that American politics isn't that different from other countries. And that's, what you were saying. It's this illusion that America would go out and promote a more democratic order in countries around the world, or that America has any legitimacy in doing that. I think is eroded once you understand American politics for what it is.
Can you identify a single reason why you think JFK and RFK, and if it's two different reasons, tell me why specifically they were knocked out?
Well, I think they did have more liberal policies in some area. Like they had many enemies. I mean, they had enemy in the oil industry. They were adopting the oil taxes in the oil industry that Lyndon Johnson took away. I mean, Johnson came from oil country in Texas, so he had the backing of like Clint Murchison and the Hunt, these big oil barons in Texas, and they didn't want the oil depletion allowance and oil tax that the Kennedys were imposing. And some of the Kennedys policies, yeah, were more liberal, like than Johnson, or the new right movement favored complete deregulation of industry and much lower corporate taxes. Although Kennedy was bringing the corporate taxes down from Eisenhower, but later the Reagan, for instance, brought it down considerably more. So those factions, wanted Reagan type policy, and Reagan was more aggressive. I mean, Kennedy, I would label him an aggressive Cold Warrior, but Lyndon Johnson, escalated the Vietnam War and Americanized. I mean, he was more aggressive than Kennedy, more militaristic. So was Reagan. So there were, industry like the, military industrial complex, the oil industry. These industry would support a faction like Johnson or Reagan over Kennedy, some of whose policy were a little more liberal. Uh, and Johnson was from the South, and I mean some of it is regional. I mean the Kennedys were the northeastern, coastal elite, and Johnson was the deep South, and Reagan came from California and the West, and had backing from industry and people there. And the political beliefs are a little different. I mean, in Massachusetts, where Kennedy from, they do generally support higher taxes and more liberal policy by instinct, whereas in the South, they're strongly support a limited government. So some of it is regional based, it's cultural to some extent, and it's also different faction of industry, and then there may be different faction of the CIA and so-called deep state aligning with different political figures, and you can see those divisions with Trump and the Clinton and Democrats now. There are certain segments of U.S. society that prefer Trump. There are others that prefer the Clinton type Democrat or Biden, the more conservative Democrat. And there are certain industries and powerful backers that they have over Trump, and he has his supporters, and it's a power struggle that continues.
So there's a lot to it. It's not like the mob was mad at this guy because he knew his secret. It is, I mean, there's a lot at stake. And of course, I would think that those levers of power are pulled by the powerful. So I can see that. Well, I want to wrap it up. I have a few, we'll just take a couple of questions over here. Frightening Me says the secret Israeli Dimona nuclear reactor was a large part of the reason behind the JFK assassination. Does that sound
I mean,
plausible
I
to
don't
you?
know for sure. Yeah, again, there are other interests that are like as you say, the mafia did. There were factions of the mafia that had a vendetta against Kennedy, but I think there are larger power struggles going on, and that's why I would recommend Peter Dale Scott's book, "Deep Politics of the Death of JFK," because he goes into some of the broad array of interests aligned against
Hmm.
Kennedy without mythologizing Kennedy. Um, but I mean, I don't know for sure. Yeah, there are again, different reasons why people hated Kennedy and may have wanted him taken out. But there is a broad coalition of interests that were, I think, arrayed against him.
I like this one from Clint. Globalists, is that what we call those at the helm of all this? Are the communists just a tool? Is the goal as simply as controlling the world? See, I think that too. I think they've resurrected this communism boogeyman when we've all gravitated towards the, communist, fascist, totalitarian, whatever center. It's obviously being I'm not sure whether government comes before corporations or corporations come before government, but they're clearly mostly working together and controlling the private sector and the public sector. So I see there's factions that you think there are factions, but would you agree that the very highest level, we're just talking about what I call the corpo governmental continuum?
Well, I think there are factions, that may ally between certain politicians or certain political parties. They're not always, in agreement on how things should be run. I mean, we see differences between the Republican and Democratic Party, for instance, in the United States, just like in other countries. Now, there are some issues where I think they are aligned. They all seem to, support, U.S. imperialism abroad and maintenance of, was it 800 to 1,000 overseas military bases, intervention in places like Ukraine. I think most of the factions of the elite support that. They may differ on the style of intervention. Like, I mean, Obama's style was more the CIA style, more covert intervention, less boots on the ground, whereas other leaders, were more pro-military. Even the Clintons, I think that was a divide between Obama and Clinton. The way I saw it was that Obama was more the boy of the CIA, and Clinton was more military. Because there was an article I read, like Hillary the
Hmm.
Hawk, and she was always very pro-military. She had even once tried to enlist in the military, and she kind of was favoring more aggressive military intervention, whereas Obama was not a dove, but he favored more the CIA's kind of light footprint drone approach,
Hmm.
which I think they're both bad, but
Yeah, of
it's
course.
just like a different style. But that's what I think you find where you find divisions. As far as the globalists, I don't know for sure. I mean, I studied more American politics, and I don't know. I mean, yeah, there clearly are some power brokers who very wealthy family like the Rothschilds and Gates who have huge control over political structures, are able to exert control in many countries. As far as the communists, I don't think the communist movement is was destroyed in the McCarthy era, and is not influential in the Western countries anymore.
All right, I'm going to do one last question and then I'll let you go. Jen Excellent says, are the reports of RFK saying he planned to reopen the investigation into his brother's assassination if he won the presidency true or verified to your knowledge?
Well, I don't think who's going to win I mean, RFK Jr. is going to run for president.
No, no. When RFK was
Oh,
running for
that I've
president.
heard. Yeah, yeah. That's one reason they probably wanted him taken out, is because he was going to reopen the investigation. I mean, I think he believed that the CIA was behind it in some ways, and he knew his family was under attack. And I agree with that. Yeah, I think he was going to reopen. That's probably the reason he was killed, among other reasons. I mean, he was trying to channel the '60s New Left movement and was embracing many of their policies, including promoting withdrawal from Vietnam and transforming U.S. foreign policy. So I think that scared elements of the elite as well. But I would agree probably with that guess that that's probably a key reason they didn't want that investigation opened up, a legitimate investigation, which would show that there's no way Oswald was the
Yes.
assassin.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, I'm hoping that the next time we talk, we can catch up on some of the great work you've been doing on Ukraine lately. I'm sure you're elbow deep in that stuff, but it doesn't seem to be dominating the mainstream headlines as much as it used to. So I'm assuming that there's more going on than you just stumble upon in my cursory reading of the mainstream media. So hopefully you'll do that with us maybe next month.
Sure, my pleasure. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here, Jeremy. It is always a pleasure. You are truly a dive master. And thank you for leading us on this journey into the past, which extends right to the here and now. And no doubt it will continue into the future. And I hope that you do write the book on the pattern of assassinations. I think it'd be great to put it in one place, although I'm afraid that you're going to be in danger if you connect dots too clearly. I think that's a thing you've got to
Yeah,
proceed with
that's
caution.
true. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, talk to you soon.
Bye, guys. Thanks for listening.